Imagine discovering the life you built was based on lies. Let me kick this off with a bit of a flex. Yeah, I know, it's not exactly the humblest way to start, but trust me, you'll get why in a minute. I'm 40 years old, and in the last few months, I've been with not one, not two, but 3 incredible women. And no, this isn't some exaggerated fantasy or a wild fling-filled weekend, it actually happened. 3 stunning women, all part of a plan. Before you roll your eyes and think I'm just blowing smoke, let me make one thing crystal clear, this wasn't about boosting my ego or going through a midlife crisis. It was about revenge. Cold, calculated, and unapologetically satisfying revenge against my wife. Yep, you read that right. If you're looking for some feel-good story where I discover the meaning of life or forgive and move on, you're in the wrong place. This is messy, raw, and anything but conventional. Curious about how it all unfolded? Buckle up, because it's one heck of a ride, and I'm not holding back. Let's start at the beginning. I'm just your average guy. Nothing flashy, no luxury cars, yachts, or billionaire lifestyle. I've been married for 11 years and with her even longer. Together, we built a life, 2 kids, a mortgage, the whole package. If you'd asked me a few months ago, I'd have said our marriage wasn't perfect, but it wasn't falling apart either. I thought we were solid, like an old pair of sneakers, worn but dependable. Turns out, I couldn't have been more wrong. The night that changed everything started off like any other. I came home from work, exhausted but ready to wind down. She'd made dinner that evening, something special, as if she was putting in extra effort. There was this look on her face, though, the kind of look that said she needed to talk. I didn't think much of it. I mean, couples talk, right? But I had no idea the bomb she was about to drop. We sat at the table. The kids were already asleep, and I was digging into the meal, thinking it was just another regular night. Then, mid-bite, she hit me with it. I was settling into the evening, enjoying dinner, when she began talking, not the usual chit-chat about our day or the kids, but something heavier. Out of nowhere, she launched into how she felt our marriage was stagnant, how it had lost its spark. Her words weren't loud or angry, but they cut just the same, like tiny daggers pricking at my composure. I did my best to stay calm and let her speak. I wasn't blind to the fact that things had cooled off between us. After a decade together, 2 kids, and the constant grind of full-time jobs, it was hard to keep the same excitement we once had. But that didn't mean I thought we were doomed. To me, it was just life. Marriage is supposed to be work, right? Apparently, I was alone in that belief. She kept going, talking about how bored she was, how predictable everything had become. I sat there, halfway through my meal, my fork hovering in midair as her words hit me. And then, she dropped the real bomb. I think we should open our relationship, she said. I froze. The bite of food in my mouth might as well have been rubber. It was tasteless, meaningless, as my brain tried to process what she'd just said. I forced my face to stay neutral, but inside, I was screaming. Counseling? Sure. A talk about how we could reconnect? Definitely. Even the mention of separation wouldn't have shocked me as much as this. But there she was, continuing on, as though she didn't notice the storm brewing inside me. I don't see it as cheating, she said, her tone casual, like she was suggesting we rearrange the furniture or try a new restaurant. Just for a little while. I think we both need some space, some freedom. Freedom. That word made my blood boil. She sat across from me, pitching the idea of sleeping with other people as if it were some harmless, guilt-free experiment. The way she spoke, so calm, so detached, like this was a normal, mature solution for a couple feeling stuck, infuriated me. It wasn't normal. It wasn't mature. It felt like betrayal, dressed up as a modern take on marriage. She wanted the best of both worlds, the stability and comfort of our marriage and the thrill of being with someone new. And she didn't even seem to feel bad about it. She was trying to sell me on the idea, oblivious to the quiet rage building behind my carefully neutral expression. I didn't say a word. I just kept eating, chewing methodically, nodding here and there as if I were considering her proposal. Inside, though, I was a volcano ready to erupt. I wasn't actually considering her proposal, not for a second. What I was really doing was holding back every urge to flip the table, throw my dinner plate across the room, and storm out. But as she kept talking, rambling about how this open relationship idea would somehow save our marriage, something clicked in my mind. A grim realization settled over me like a heavy fog. Our marriage wasn't just in trouble, it was already dead. A corpse, rotting beneath the surface, and she just hadn't admitted it yet. Here's the thing, if your wife asks for an open relationship, it's already over. She's checked out emotionally, mentally, and, let's be honest, probably physically, too. What she was asking for wasn't some harmless break or experiment to rekindle things. No, this was a smokescreen. She'd already found someone. I could see it in how desperate she was to sell me on the idea, in the way she had rehearsed every justification. There was a guy, maybe just in her head, but more likely already in her bed, and now she wanted to make it legit. But instead of losing it, instead of calling her out or confronting her on the spot, I stayed calm. I played it cool. I agreed. Yeah, I agreed to her ridiculous, insulting plan. Why? Because in that moment, I realized I could play the long game. She thought she'd won. She thought she had just scored her hall pass, free to do whatever or whoever she wanted, while I stayed home, oblivious and pathetic. What she didn't know was that I had my own plans for revenge that she couldn't even begin to imagine. So, I smiled. I forced a bite of my now tasteless dinner, nodded as if I were actually considering it, and said, "You know what? Maybe you're right." And that's how it began. That night, after our little dinner chat, I couldn't sleep. She was lying next to me, out cold, those stupid earplugs in and her sleep mask on, the same routine she swore helped her rest. I had to laugh, quietly to myself. Here she was, probably thinking she was the slickest person alive, confident that I'd bought into her plan without question. But she had no idea what I was about to do. See, we never used to keep secrets from each other, or so I thought. We shared everything, phones, passwords, you name it. That's what made it so easy to slip my hand under her pillow and grab her phone while she was asleep. My heart was racing as I held it in my hands, wondering if she'd been bold enough to change her password. I took a deep breath, tapped in the code I still remembered, and boom, it unlocked. Game on. A strange mix of anger and adrenaline surged through me as I stared at her unlocked phone. I couldn't believe she hadn't changed her password. She really thought I'd never catch on. My hands were shaking slightly as I opened her messages. Part of me was terrified of what I might find, but the other part, fueled by anger, was ready to see it all laid bare. It didn't take long. Right there, sitting smugly in her chat app, was the guy she'd been talking to. His profile picture was a dead giveaway, a cocky, pretty boy grin that practically screamed, "I'm the guy ruining your marriage." My blood boiled as I scrolled through their conversation. If they hadn't already crossed the physical line, it was clear it wouldn't be long. The messages were explicit, flirty, and unfiltered. The way she responded to him. It wasn't just casual banter or some harmless fantasy. It was real, and it was gut-wrenching to see her so mentally checked out of our marriage. Honestly, at that point, did it even matter if she hadn't slept with him yet? Betrayal is betrayal, and for me, emotional cheating is just as devastating as the physical act. And judging by the flurry of emojis, risque pictures, and the tone of their words, it was only a matter of time before they crossed that line, too. I took screenshots of everything. Every word, every picture, even his smug Instagram profile. I sent it all to myself, proof for later, in case I needed it. By the time I was done, I had enough ammunition to dismantle her world completely. But I wasn't ready to confront her just yet. If this was going to end, it was going to end on my terms. So, I made a plan. And I wasn't doing this alone. Without hesitating, I grabbed my phone and called a couple of my closest friends. Yeah, it was late, probably pushing midnight, but I didn't care. I needed them on board, and I needed them now. One by one, I woke them up, telling them to meet me at the park. No details. Just, show up. This is serious. It was eerie when we all gathered at the park around 1 or 2 a.m. The place was deserted, just a handful of streetlights casting long shadows over the grass. My friends arrived groggy and confused, some rubbing their eyes, others shivering against the cool night air. "What the hell, man?" one of them grumbled, crossing his arms. I didn't waste time with pleasantries. The look on my face must have said it all because the confusion on theirs quickly turned into concern. They knew I wasn't messing around. "I need your help," I said, getting straight to the point. I didn't hold back, I told my friends everything. I laid it all out, the dinner, her pitch for an open relationship, and the messages I'd found. For the first few minutes, they didn't say much, just stood there listening, processing it all. But as I pulled out my phone and showed them the screenshots, their expressions shifted. Shock gave way to anger, and I could see they were just as furious as I was. "What are you going to do?" one of them asked, their voice tight with disbelief. I didn't hesitate. I told them my plan. It wasn't completely figured out yet, more of a skeleton than a fully fleshed out strategy, but the basics were there. I explained how I needed to get ahead of this, to make sure that when everything hit the fan, I'd be the one in control, not her. But I couldn't do it alone. I needed their help. At first, they thought I was out of my mind. I could see it in their faces, what I was proposing was risky, maybe even a little extreme. But after I walked them through it and we hashed out some of the finer details, they started to see the bigger picture. We made a few adjustments, ironed out some of the kinks, and by the time we left the park, they were on board. We all agreed on one thing: this had to be handled decisively and intelligently. No room for error. No half measures. As I drove home, I felt a strange mix of emotions. On one hand, I was relieved. I had a plan, and I had the support of people I trusted. But on the other hand, I couldn't ignore the gnawing sense of dread in my gut. What I was about to do would change everything. There was no turning back now. No second guessing. This was happening. When I got back home, I slipped into bed next to her as quietly as possible. She didn't stir, still out cold with her earplugs and sleep mask. I lay there staring at the ceiling, my thoughts spinning out of control. Fear crept in, whispering all the ways this could go wrong. What if she figured out what I was planning? What if I wasn't as smart or as prepared as I thought I was? But then, I thought about the messages I'd read, about her smug, carefree attitude over dinner. That was all the motivation I needed. This had to be done. By the time the first rays of sunlight broke through the blinds, I was wide awake, my mind racing. I couldn't sit around pretending to be the oblivious husband any longer. The betrayal was still fresh, burning like a brand in my thoughts. It was time to act. I reached out to a lawyer first thing that morning. When he picked up, his tone was neutral, professional, probably used to dealing with husbands calling in panic or anger. But I wasn't panicked. I was cold, deliberate. I got straight to the point, outlining the situation and what I wanted to achieve. He started talking about gathering evidence, but I cut him off. "Don't worry about that," I said firmly. "I've already got everything I need." He paused, then quickly adjusted, diving into the steps we'd need to take. By the end of the call, he had me scheduled for a meeting that afternoon to start the paperwork. This was it, the wheels were officially in motion. When I hung up the phone, the surge of adrenaline was like nothing I'd ever felt. This was real now, no longer just some guy discovering his wife's emotional affair. I wasn't going to sit back and let this play out on her terms. The plan was in motion, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had the upper hand. Later that day, I revisited the Instagram profile of the idiot she was about to ruin our marriage over. His feed was exactly what I expected, a gallery of fake wannabe influencer nonsense. Expensive watches, rented sports cars, photos with models who probably didn't even know his name. Classic case of a guy trying way too hard to look like someone he wasn't. Just another poser projecting a life of luxury while hiding behind a facade of filters. But here's the kicker, the moment my friends confronted him, the guy folded like a house of cards. I wasn't even there, but I didn't need to be. I had expected some resistance, maybe even a cocky attitude, but nope. This guy was a spineless coward through and through. Within minutes, he spilled everything without so much as a fight. Apparently, the prospect of his fling with a married woman blowing up in his face, possibly destroying his carefully curated image, was enough to send him into a panic. I didn't want to waste time or energy on him. Sure, I was furious, but this wasn't about him, it was about her. If my wife hadn't decided to cheat, this guy wouldn't even be in the picture. So, instead of letting my anger spiral, I turned him into a tool for my plan. I gave him an option, either disappear completely and never contact her again, or become my little informant. It wasn't a hard choice for him. He wanted to protect his lifestyle, and I had all the leverage. No violence, no over-the-top revenge on him. That wasn't the point. The real target of my plan wasn't the guy she cheated with, it was her. A few days later, the next stage of my plan unfolded. It was a Friday morning when she casually mentioned, over breakfast, that she'd be going to her parents' house for the weekend. The way she said it, so nonchalant, sipping her coffee like it was just another quiet family visit, made me want to laugh. I could see right through her act. She wasn't going to her parents' house, I knew exactly where she was headed. "I'm going to spend the weekend with my parents," she said, glancing at me over her mug, her tone as casual as ever. I smiled back, keeping my face as neutral as possible. "Sounds nice," I replied, playing the role of the clueless husband perfectly. She thought she was clever, sneaking off under the guise of a family trip, but she had no idea that everything was unfolding exactly as I wanted. The moment the door clicked shut behind her, my heart started racing, not out of fear, but out of anticipation. This wasn't a reactive move anymore. I wasn't just some helpless victim waiting for my world to fall apart. I was in control now, and she had no idea what was coming. I grabbed my phone and sent a quick text to my friends, "It's time." They didn't hesitate. About 30 minutes later, they pulled up outside, bringing everything and everyone needed to set the stage. Bottles of booze, loud laughter, and 3 younger women, all dressed to turn heads and more than eager to bring some chaos into my otherwise mundane house. The moment they stepped inside, the energy shifted. It was like the air itself had changed, heavier, wilder, freer. As they poured drinks and music started playing, I could feel something I hadn't felt in ages, release. It wasn't just the alcohol or the party vibe, it was the weight lifting off my shoulders, if only for a while. And beneath it all, there was this deep, buzzing thrill because I knew something my wife didn't, her little boyfriend wasn't going to show up. He had blocked her. My puppet was playing his part perfectly, too afraid of the fallout to risk sticking around. She thought she was off to enjoy a secret rendezvous, but I knew she'd be turning around soon, angry, confused, and completely unaware of what awaited her. Inside, the party escalated quickly. Drinks were poured, laughter grew louder, and before I knew it, the women were giggling and peeling off their tops as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Piece by piece, I let go of the man I'd been, the loyal husband, the dependable provider. For years, I'd played my role, done what was expected of me. But now, I felt something else entirely. The warm haze of alcohol, the electric thrill of breaking every rule I'd ever lived by, it was intoxicating. I wasn't thinking about consequences or tomorrow. I wasn't thinking about her. I was letting years of restraint fall away. And just as I thought I was fully immersed in the chaos of the moment, I heard it, her voice, cutting through the noise like a knife. "What the hell is going on here?" she screamed. I froze. I hadn't heard the front door open. I hadn't heard her come up the stairs. But there she was, standing in the doorway, her face twisted in a mix of shock, rage, and disbelief. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in every detail, the empty bottles, the half-dressed women, the unmistakable scene of me in bed with 3 strangers. For a split second, I hesitated. Then her fury erupted. She lunged toward the bed, her hands trembling with anger as she ripped the women away from me, one by one, shouting at them to get out. They didn't put up a fight, stumbling around, giggling nervously as they grabbed their clothes and belongings. Half-dressed and still tipsy, they left, their laughter echoing down the stairs and out the front door. To them, it was just a wild night gone sideways. To her, it was something else entirely, a nightmare she couldn't escape. When the room was finally empty, her rage turned to me. She stood there, trembling, her voice cracking as she demanded an explanation. But I didn't flinch. I stayed calm, letting the silence stretch between us for a moment. Then I met her eyes and, with a calmness that surprised even me, said, "This is on you. Your choice. You pushed us here." Her face twisted further, her expression one of pure betrayal. But I wasn't done. "How was your date?" I asked, my voice laced with venom. The room went silent, save for the sound of her shaky breath. And in that moment, she realized this wasn't some spontaneous mistake. This was intentional. This was retribution. I asked the question casually, almost nonchalantly. "How was your date?" My tone was calm, but the weight of my words hung in the air like a storm cloud. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears, her eyes red and puffy. For a moment, she didn't say anything. She didn't need to, the look in her eyes said it all. That was the moment she realized it. She knew I'd set her up. She knew everything had been orchestrated, planned to perfection, and that I'd been 3 steps ahead the entire time. She opened her mouth, maybe to explain or to argue, but I wasn't interested in hearing it. "Don't bother," I said, cutting her off, my voice calm but unyielding. "This is done." I walked away after that, letting her stew in the fallout of her own choices. The next morning, I texted my friends. They didn't need much convincing, they were all in, ready to regroup at our usual spot, a local bar where we'd spent countless nights sharing stories and shooting the breeze. This time, though, the story was all mine. When I walked in, they were already there, beers in hand, smirking like they knew something wild was coming. As soon as I sat down, one of them leaned forward, grinning. "All right, man. Spill. How'd it all go down?" I couldn't help but smirk back as I told them everything, the party, the setup, the grand finale of my wife walking in on me mid-act. Wait, one of my buddies interrupted, barely able to contain his laughter. "She just walks in, and you're like, 'Hey, open relationship, right?' That's gold." We all broke into laughter. I nodded, the grin still on my face. "Pretty much." She froze at first, like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. And then, boom, she completely lost it. Started screaming and throwing the girls out like she hadn't just pitched the whole idea herself. One of them leaned back in his chair, shaking his head with a smirk. "Man, 3 girls at once and your wife walking in. That's the ultimate revenge. You're a legend." I shook my head, still smiling but more reflective now. It wasn't even about that, I admitted. It wasn't just about messing around or even about revenge, really. It was about showing her that she doesn't get to call the shots anymore. That she's not the one in control. For a moment, there was silence around the table, a kind of unspoken understanding. These guys had been there for me through everything, and their loyalty had been a lifeline through all this chaos. We finished our beers and started talking about what came next. The crazy part? The divorce wasn't even as dramatic as I'd expected. After everything that had gone down, I think my ex just realized she didn't have the fight left in her. It was like she knew she'd already lost and there was no point in dragging it out. No last-minute drama. No screaming matches, one of them asked, raising an eyebrow. I shook my head. None. She signed the papers, and that was it. One of my friends leaned forward, curious. So, what now? You've got your freedom back. What are you going to do with it? I smiled faintly, but there was a hint of exhaustion behind it. I don't know, man. I guess I figure it out from here. And that's exactly where I was, standing at the edge of a new chapter, unsure of what came next but finally, mercifully free. I'm focusing on moving forward now. I've spent enough time looking back, trying to pinpoint where it all went wrong. At some point, you have to decide to let it go and start fresh. That's where I'm at, putting the past behind me and figuring out what comes next. That night at the bar, we laughed, drank, and talked until closing time. It felt good to let the weight of everything lift, even if just for a while. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that you have to stay aware. Don't get so comfortable in your relationship that you stop seeing the signs. Look at your spouse, really look. Pay attention to the small changes, the subtle shifts. Don't let things crumble unnoticed. And if they do, don't be afraid to take control of the situation. Trust me, you don't want to end up like I did, finding out the hard way. Update, a year later. It's been a little over a year since everything went down, and I thought it was time to share an update on where life has taken me. Looking back, I'm surprised by how clean the break was. I'd braced myself for endless court battles and fighting over every little thing, but that never happened. After that final confrontation, my ex seemed too drained to put up much of a fight. Maybe she realized there was no point, or maybe she wanted out just as badly as I did. We split everything, the house, the cars, the money, and walked away. I got what I needed, and she got what she deserved. There were no dragged-out arguments or lingering drama. Just a clean break. Life after the storm. Since then, it's been a whirlwind, but in the best way. For the first time in years, I've been able to think about what I want out of life. What kind of future do I want to build now that I'm free from the weight of a toxic relationship? It wasn't an easy question to answer at first. I had to take a long, hard look at myself and figure out what really mattered to me. One of the biggest surprises. My career. I threw myself into work, not just to stay busy, but to reinvent myself. And funny enough, as soon as I shifted my focus, opportunities seemed to come out of nowhere. It was like the universe was rewarding me for finally putting myself first. I'm not saying it's been perfect or that I've figured everything out, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I'm building a life that's entirely mine. A life with purpose, clarity, and freedom. And honestly, that's worth everything I went through to get here. I stopped holding myself back and started taking risks, real, calculated risks. For a while, it felt like I was throwing darts in the dark, unsure if anything would stick. But slowly, things began to fall into place. I built a small team, pitched my vision to a few investors, and eventually got some backing. Before I knew it, the business wasn't just an idea, it was a reality. A year later, we're not just surviving, we're thriving. I'm not saying I'm a millionaire or living some high-rolling lifestyle, but the success we've achieved has given me something I hadn't felt in years: pride. Purpose. I even made a few headlines in the local business news. Nothing major, but seeing my hard work recognized like that, it felt incredible. The journey wasn't just about building a business, though, it was about rebuilding myself. I took the time to heal, to clear my head, and figure out who I was without being someone's husband. I needed that space to grow. And just when I was starting to feel comfortable with being on my own, someone came along. Funny how life works like that. We met through mutual friends, nothing planned, nothing forced, and we just clicked. She's amazing, smart, funny, independent. And the best part? She's not looking for anything from me except honesty and a good time. No drama, no baggage, just two people enjoying each other's company. It's refreshing, to say the least. I'm taking things slow this time, though. No rushing, no pressure. I've learned my lesson about jumping in too fast. Looking back, it's wild to think about how much my life has changed in just over a year. If you'd told me then that I'd be where I am now, running a successful business, in the best shape of my life, and starting something new with someone incredible, I'd have laughed in your face. But here I am, proving to myself that life can turn around in ways you never expect. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that sometimes you have to lose everything to find yourself. To anyone reading this, especially if you're going through something similar, just know this, it's not the end. It's a chance to rebuild. To start fresh. You're stronger than you think, and there's a better version of your life waiting on the other side of the pain. Keep going. You've got this. As I sat back, reflecting on how far I'd come, I realized I wasn't just living, I was thriving in a way I'd never imagined. The past year had been a whirlwind of rebuilding, rediscovery, and risk-taking, but it had all led me here. And just when I thought I'd finally settled into my new life, something happened that turned everything on its head once again. It started with an unexpected phone call. My assistant buzzed in, her voice tinged with urgency. "You need to see this," she said. Confused, I stepped out of my meeting and walked over to her desk, where she had a news article pulled up on her screen. My ex-wife's face stared back at me, along with a headline that made my stomach flip, "Local woman accused of fraud in business dealings." Turns out, she hadn't just quietly faded into the background. She'd been trying to rebuild her own life too, but in ways that cut corners and involved shady dealings. And now, the fallout was very public. As I read through the article, I felt a pang of something, pity, maybe? No, it was something else. Relief. This was the closure I didn't even know I needed. Her choices had finally caught up to her, and it wasn't my burden to carry anymore. But that wasn't the only twist. Later that evening, as I was locking up the office, I received another call, this time from one of the investors who had helped kickstart my business. His voice was excited. "I just got off the phone with a major client. They love what you're doing and want to take it nationwide. Are you ready to scale up?" Ready? I'd been waiting for this moment my whole life. The next few weeks were a blur. Meetings, deals, expansion plans, it was happening so fast, I barely had time to catch my breath. And through it all, the woman I'd been seeing stood by my side, cheering me on but never trying to take over my journey. For the first time, I felt like I was with someone who truly saw me, no strings, no manipulation, just genuine support. On the night of our official launch as a national company, I stood on stage at the celebration event, looking out at the crowd of friends, employees, and partners who had helped make it all possible. I raised my glass and said, "This isn't just about business. It's about proving that no matter how hard life hits you, you can rebuild. You can come back stronger. And sometimes, the best thing that can happen is losing what was holding you back." The crowd erupted into cheers, but it wasn't the applause that struck me, it was the feeling of absolute freedom. For the first time in years, I wasn't tied to the past. I wasn't defined by what had gone wrong, but by what I'd built out of the ashes. As I stepped down from the stage, my girlfriend caught my hand and smiled. "So, what's next?" she asked, her eyes sparkling with excitement. I grinned, the possibilities stretching out before me like an open road. "Anything," I said. "Absolutely anything."